I'll be there in a sec, just getting ready. Hello there. OBS is glitching. Okay, let's do some tech stuff first. And you host the stream. Okay, never mind. I will just leave you there in the corner. So yeah, I'm not too sure. I have a couple of videos that we can react to, but to be honest, I didn't really prepare anything. Cool. How is everyone? What did I want to do? Oh yeah, connect earphones to, not to the phone, to the computer. So this. Hello everyone. Awesome, good, working, a bit tired, and Amrali is busy writing a 4-page document, apparently. Cool. Wait, what's this? Discord, okay. So this needs to be connected here and then switch for the desktop audio. Yeah, that should do. So desktop audio properties, that's good. And I think we're good to go. Okay, yeah, let's just give it a try. I need the chair. I need the chair. Can I have chair? Me! Me! I could just let her host the stream and I go take the evening off, play video games or something, right? Meow. Meh. She's so cute. Annoyed that the Donald decided to ruin Game 3 at the NBA final. Do you really care? You're not even in New York. Isn't that mostly just a thing about people watching, like, the watch party in person of the game? May have to get a second chair. I have a second chair, but they don't like the second chair because the second chair is a little bit unstable. I guess I can use the second chair. Do you want me to use the second chair? Yeah, you do. Okay, never mind. Ah, yeah. The other thing for me is that there's no footstool for the second chair. And I guess I have no choice but to use this camera so the cat is on screen, right? Is that what we're deciding for today? Yo, Real Ray, what's up? Okay, so what are we doing? Real Ray is following on Twitch. Thanks for the follow. Ah, you are implying that he jinxed the Knicks. Okay, yeah. To be honest, I don't follow basketball enough to know anything about that. Timole, were you the person a couple of streams ago talking about what was it? You don't trust people who don't like Russians by default or something like that, and we talked about like Russian government stuff, and we had a little bit of a I like that wasn't really the topic of the conversation, so I didn't really want to go in it too much, but that might come up a little bit more this time. If we watch the Russian satellite video that I had in mind. Let me see if I can find it. You don't think so? Okay. If you don't think so, that probably wasn't you. I'm gonna assume because you would know if that was you. Is it necessary to put the camera there? If we want to have the cat in the camera, then yeah. But otherwise, usually the camera's here, and there's another cat right there. But the other cat that's right here is barely visible, which is why this camera's better. For now. Eventually, we'll just move it. We'll just change the setup. What did I want to do? It was Veritasium, I think. Veritasium. Russian satellite, GPS satellite. GPS satellite. I kind of spoiled the video, but it's not that big of a twist, actually. So let me open this without the audio on, if we can. Boom. Move it here. Close that. And I think we're good to go. And I don't know what's wrong with my OBS. I think I need to just completely reinstall OBS or something. Because it's just, there's like different modules in OBS. All of them are glitching. I don't get I usually have the live concurrent view count, but right now it's showing 0 here, but showing accurate numbers down there. The vertical stream is not working, so I deactivated it. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of broken. The cat settled into place, so I have no choice. No, I definitely have no choice. except for the fact that we are going to switch to, this kind of setup anyway, where the cat is barely visible. Making tiny sounds that are not being picked up by the microphone. Yes. Sleepy baby. She's purring really hard, but you can't hear that. Okay, so this video, I'm not sure how Veritasium reacts to copyright stuff. I hope this doesn't get a strike for content theft, because we're just gonna watch it and comment on it like we usually do. But you know, different channels different channels enforce that differently, so we'll see. Subtitles. Okay, let's activate subtitles. Let's see. Okay. Oh, wait. Sorry. I forgot to reactivate the sound. My bad. Okay, starting over. And here we go.
In November 2024, Professor Todd Humphreys, a GPS expert at the University of Texas at Austin, got a mysterious tip-off. Look at 2 specific days, at exact times in a dataset collected years earlier by a network of GPS monitoring stations. These stations continuously record signals from satellite navigation systems, measuring how strong they are relative to background noise.
It didn't seem promising. The data was from 2021, and it was publicly available online. So surely, if something unusual was in there, someone would have already found it. But Professor Humphreys and his student Zach Clements looked into the data at the 2 specific times suggested, and they discovered something surprising.
At one precise moment, receivers across the network all reported the same thing, a sudden drop in signal-to-noise ratio.
In effect, the navigation signals had been overwhelmed. The measured signal-to-noise dropped by roughly a factor of 10.
But when they started looking back through the data, they found 75 days since 2019 where these strong disruptions had taken place.
And again, the pattern was the same. All these receivers recorded the same drop at the same time.
This effect was being felt all the way across Europe, all the way to the north, to Svalbard, to the south, to Spain, all the way to Canada in the west, as far east.
Svalbard. I want to live in Svalbard one day. Sorry, completely unrelated, but I want to live there one day.
Svalbard to the south, to Spain, all the way to Canada in the west, as far east as eastern Poland. And in fact, it had a distinct pattern across Europe to where it looked like the blast center was in Poland or Kaliningrad, in that area.
So they wondered what could cause this.
At first, they thought perhaps it's interference, something on the ground broadcasting a much stronger signal, drowning out the ones coming from the satellites, which made Kaliningrad an interesting candidate. It's a heavily militarized Russian exclave on the Baltic Sea, wedged between Poland and Lithuania, and in recent years, it's become a hotspot for this kind of electronic warfare.
So maybe that was it, a side effect of the conflict in the region, but they realized that explanation didn't work.
Even the highest tower in Kaliningrad only affects aviation as far as, say, Denmark. So we had ourselves a mystery on our hands. We were experienced with interference that you could call local. Something on a tower, something on a plane. That might cover hundreds of kilometers. But this was different. This was continental scale.
The researchers mapped out all the stations that were affected and asked a simple question. What kind of source could have affected all of them at once? A source on the ground just wouldn't work. The curvature of the Earth would block the signal over these distances. The only way to affect such a wide area simultaneously is from high above the Earth. And even using the most conservative assumptions, that the source only has to just clear the horizon from the perspective of every station, the geometry shows it had to be at least 1,200 kilometers up. That's way higher than the International Space Station.
So what was causing this? Well, there is one known
Yeah, sun was my first idea. Let me see if I can find articles about this thing so that we can maybe be researching in the meantime. Europe GPS disruption satellite. Yeah, article from 3 hours ago. Yeah, so I kind of spoiled it in the title of the stream and by mentioning it earlier. But the answer is going to be, it's the Russians. We just don't know why. Oops.
known source of radio interference from space,
which is the sun. In November 2025, a major solar storm disrupted GPS positioning globally for several hours. So could these interference events be caused by the sun? There were certainly question marks.
Yeah, the problem with this is that the sun would affect everyone. Did they say how long the interferences happened when they were mentioning this earlier?
19, where these strong disruptions
and Humphreys and his student Zach Clements looked into the data at the two specific times suggested, and they discovered something surprising.
At one precise moment, receivers across the network all reported the same thing, a sudden drop in signal-to-noise ratio.
In effect, the navigation signals had been overwhelmed. The measured signal-to-noise.
Okay, they don't seem to say it.
These stations continuously record signals from satellite navigation systems, measuring how strong they are relative to background noise.
It didn't seem promising. The data was from 2021, and it was publicly available online. So surely, if something unusual was in there, someone would have already found it. But Professor Humphreys and his student Zach Clements looked into the data at the two specific times suggested, and they discovered something surprising.
At one precise moment, receivers across the network all reported the same thing, a sudden drop in signal-to-noise ratio.
In effect, the navigation signals had been overwhelmed.
I love that they say time in seconds, but there aren't any markings, so we don't know how many seconds. I'm assuming this is a really, really short disruption.
The measured signal-to-noise dropped by roughly a factor of 10.
But when they started looking back through the data, they found 75 days since 2019 where these strong disruptions had taken place.
And again, the pattern was the same. All these receivers recorded the same drop at the same time.
This effect was being felt
But for how long?
all the way across Europe, all the way to the north, to Svalbard, to the south of Spain, all the way to Canada in the west, as far east as eastern Poland. And in fact, it had a distinct pattern across Europe to where it looked like the blast center was in Poland or Kaliningrad, in that area.
So they wondered what could cause this.
At first, they thought perhaps it's interference, something on the ground broadcasting a much stronger
so we
signal,
already saw
drowning out the
this.
ones coming from the...
And apparently-
The source on the ground just wouldn't work. The curvature of the Earth would block the signal over these distances. The only way to affect such a wide area...
So back to
In
this.
November 2025, a major solar storm disrupted GPS positioning globally for several hours. So could these interference events be caused by the sun? There were certainly question marks. Solar interference typically builds up and fades over tens to hundreds of seconds, but these events were abrupt, short bursts of only 3 to 5 seconds.
Maybe the small nubs on the chart? No, the you mean the grid? I don't think so. Time seconds. Okay, now there are time seconds. So from here to here is 200 and 300 seconds. So yeah, it's going to be a matter of seconds. It's going to be like this would be a little bit under 2 minutes, and it's a tiny dip. So it's a few seconds basically.
Another important clue was the frequencies that were disrupted. Solar interference typically spans a wide range of radio frequencies, whereas this interference was confined to a very narrow slice, just 5 megahertz wide, centered at 1,577.5 megahertz. That's right in the part of the spectrum used by GPS. And the final nail in the coffin is that solar radio bursts affect the entire sunlit side of the Earth. But what the researchers were seeing here was much more concentrated, consistently centered over Europe. So Todd and Zach realized the only thing that could be causing this was a satellite, which left them with just one question.
Is it intentional or is it accidental? Both my student and I looked at this and said, unprecedented. We've never seen this before. The world has never seen this before.
This satellite seemed to be targeting GPS.
Hello, Merali.
Or rather, what most of us call GPS. That is just a shorthand. GPS is the American system, but there are others, including a Russian one, a European one, and a Chinese one. And your phone is actually using a mix of these satellites to try and tell you where you
Is this
are.
too fast?
These systems are known as
I mean,
Global Navigation Satellite Systems, or GNSS.
And when the US military first developed the system in the 1970s, they wanted to prove how well it really worked.
So the GPS Program Office set itself an ambitious goal to use GPS to drop 5 bombs in a row into the same hole from a moving plane.
They set up a chair next to the site that the bombs were going to be going into.
Wait, what?
Okay, whatever.
If anyone doubts that we can drop the bombs in the same hole, you're welcome to.
Listening to the exact time the
history.
signal was set. And then the receiver can compare that to when the signal arrives, and you
This
can
is
use
useful.
that time difference. The signals from satellites.
This work.
Well, think
So how does GPS work?
So how does GPS work?
Well, think about what your phone is actually trying to do to tell you where you are. It's listening to signals from satellites. And those signals can tell it 2 things. First, the position of the satellite in space, and second, the exact time the signal was set. And then the receiver can compare that to when the signal arrives, and you can use that time difference, multiply it by the speed of light, and you get the distance. So if it took the signal 0.07 seconds, that must mean you're around 21,000 kilometers away from the satellite.
If you're only using a single satellite, that puts you somewhere on a huge sphere around it. Now, you can add a second one, and that will narrow your position down to this circle where the 2 spheres intersect. If you add a third, you will narrow it down to only 2 possible points, and only one of these is actually on Earth's surface. So you might think 3 satellites is all you need.
We have 3 equations, 1 for each satellite, and 3 unknowns that are my position, x, y, and z. So on the left side, I have the geometric distance between me and each of the 3 satellites, and on the right side, I have the measured signal time, all multiplied by the speed of light.
Now, satellites have atomic clocks, so they're
Honestly, it's kind of insane that we were able to build this kind of stuff. The fact that we have that it's not just that we don't realize when we're using our phones with our Google Maps that tells us where we are in the street, that it's not just, oh, we have something that is giving us coordinates on the latitude and longitude. No, it is calculations of the time that it takes to receive a signal from various satellites and offsetting the different times from all of the satellite to deduce an exact, the math is insane, and the fact that we were able to build this is kind of crazy.
timing drifts by only 3 seconds every million years. But my phone does not contain an atomic clock, so its clock can drift by that much in just a couple of days. And a timing error of just 100 nanoseconds throws off your position by 30 meters. So in reality, each distance is slightly wrong, which means the position you calculate is slightly off too.
So now, instead of just solving for position, I also have to solve for the clock error. So let's call that B. But now I have 3 equations and 4 unknowns, which is unsolvable. So I can fix that by adding a 4th equation or a 4th satellite. 4 equations, 4 unknowns, that makes the system solvable. Okay, but we've made one key assumption, that when I'm calculating my position, I know where the satellite is. And sure, it can tell me where it is, but its position around the Earth and its speed are constantly changing. So how does the satellite actually know where it is in the first place?
The GPS satellites need to be told where they are, and they're told where they are with ground stations that monitor them. And the ground stations have to know where they are to tell the satellites where they are.
But the Earth itself is constantly shifting as the continents move.
So how do we work out where the ground stations are? You work out using quasars where the ground stations are.
And the satellites are moving at the same time. Just genuinely mental stuff.
Because they're billions of light years away, quasars appear almost perfectly fixed in the night sky, which means we can use them as reference points, much like early explorers navigating by the stars. A small fraction of quasars are extremely bright radio sources. When those radio waves reach Earth, telescopes around the world detect them at slightly different times. From those tiny differences in arrival time, you can precisely determine the relative position of the telescopes, and by making lots of those measurements over time, you can build a precise map of how the Earth itself moves, continents included. GPS ground stations are tied into that same map.
The ground stations tell the satellites where they are, and then that's how you work out where you are.
You just blew my mind.
So we're always navigating by the stars, just via GPS.
And in reality, your phone isn't connected to just 4 satellites. It's usually far more than that. Mine right now is using, it's like over 20 satellites.
That's because the system is doing much more than just solving for 4 equations.
Say you're on this little street in Paris and you open maps and you try and figure out where you are. Turns out there are a lot of things that can throw this off. There's the relatively simple ones like taking into account special and general relativity. If you didn't correct for that, your position would drift about 11 kilometers per day, and you could be anywhere within this entire area. So the satellites are constantly being monitored and updated, and they send down timing corrections that your phone applies in real time. Now, on top of that, in the fraction of a second that it takes for the signal to reach you, the Earth has actually rotated slightly. So when your phone figures out where you are, it also has to account for the fact where Paris was when the signal was sent, not where it is now. If you don't correct for that, that adds about 20 meters of error, enough that you're not even on the same block. And of course, the signal has to pass through Earth's atmosphere. Now, the ionosphere will add between 5 and 15 meters of error to your position, and the lower levels of the atmosphere, with weather and pressure and humidity, will add another meter or 2. So if you don't account for that, you'll still be on the wrong side of the street. And that's where the extra satellites come in handy. They give your phone extra measurements to separate out the errors and give you a better fix of your position. So ultimately, it can be accurate down to 3 to 5 meters, which is pretty incredible if you think about what it takes to solve this. And with the most advanced GNSS tech, you can push this even further to a few centimeters. But at this point, you actually...
Okay, this is cool, but it's not related to the thing, the disruption thing.
But all of
It's traveled 20,000 kilometers to get here, and it was only transmitted with about 50 watts of power. So it's like an old school light bulb 2 Earth diameters away.
And because that power spreads out over such a vast distance, the received GPS signal at your phone is only about 1/10 of a quadrillionth of a watt, or 10 to the negative 16 watts.
It's insanely quiet.
Which means it doesn't take much to drown it out. If you broadcast enough noise at the same frequency, you can overwhelm the signal until it becomes indistinguishable from the background. This is called jamming. And a lot of these navigation systems use the same slice of the radio spectrum, roughly between 1.1 and 1.6 gigahertz. Lower frequencies travel well through the atmosphere, but they require much larger antennas. Higher frequencies allow for smaller antennas, but the signals are much more easily absorbed and scattered, especially in bad weather. So this band is a kind of sweet spot that navigation systems rely on, which means if something interferes with it, it can affect multiple systems at once. That's why this part of the spectrum is tightly protected. Nothing else is supposed to be transmitting here, and deliberately interfering with these signals is illegal in most countries. But something was, something powerful enough to overwhelm satellite navigation across an entire continent. Which brings us back to the question facing Professor Todd Humphreys. Was this accidental, or was someone flooding this band on purpose?
It's a mystery novel here where you're trying to figure out whether it was the butler in the kitchen with the crowbar, right? And we have to put all of the clues together. If it had been random, occurring because of some failure in a satellite, maybe some amplifier gets too hot and misbehaves, then you'd expect it to happen equally likely on a Monday and a Friday, right?
But when they went back through the data, something strange emerged. The interference events were happening mostly on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, during business hours in Europe.
So tell me what amplifier tends to fail during business hours in Europe on Wednesdays?
So now we know this probably isn't random. There's likely human input. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's intentional or malicious. So the hunt was on to track down the actual source. But that turned out to be...
Just give me a sec. You think this is how they jam satellite TV? Because I think that the TV signals have the same... I'm not sure. So the thing is, this is how they jam signals in general, but it's not always coming from a satellite. So if you are receiving satellite TV, like TV through satellite, the jamming signal doesn't have to come from a satellite. It can come from a nearby antenna anywhere, as long as that antenna sees the position you're at. So just a really tall tower and a jamming device at the tall tower could potentially jam TV signal for the entire city, they would just have to blast noise at the same frequency as the TV, the satellite TV frequency. In the same way that right now there's noise blasting at the same frequency as GPS signal. The reason why this has to be in a satellite, it's because it's affecting a huge area. It's affecting all of Europe. If they only wanted to affect Paris, they could put it much lower, in like, you know, on a mountain overseeing Paris. There isn't a mountain overseeing Paris, but like on top of a tower over Paris, something like that. So that's why they were saying the tallest tower in Kaliningrad would affect up to like Denmark, which is pretty far away, but it's not all of Europe. And so if you want something that sees all of Europe, you have to go like, you know, thousands of kilometers into space, like, you know, 3 times the height of the International Space Station. That's how they know that this came from a satellite.
Harder than you might think, because there were still so many unknowns. In situations like this, uncertainty can quickly turn into competing narratives. We've seen it before.
However, I'm just realizing, in the case of Iran, as far as I know, what's it called? The SpaceX Elon Musk internet connection thing. What's it called? Yeah, that must be a really large tower. What is the SpaceX internet service? Starlink, of course. I've used Starlink. Like, I've been on Starlink networks, so I should know this. Why can't Iran jam Starlink signal? Is my question. Because I know that Iran spent a lot of time jamming, like cutting the internet, and as you know, Emirali, Iran can actively jam, according to the AI overview. So, unreliable source, can jam Starlink signals, but they cannot do it perfectly or easily due to Starlink satellites' network structure. While the government has used sophisticated military jamming technology, this service remains highly resilient for several reasons. Massive satellite constellation, but that doesn't matter because it depends on the frequency that is used. So the number of satellites shouldn't be relevant here. Yeah, this doesn't seem relevant to me. I mean, probably is, but I don't understand why. Fun fact, if I remember correctly, we did read on Iranian media, they also used these to find stockpiles. And people who use them, yeah, that makes sense. The system constantly switches frequencies and dynamically routes data between different satellites and ground stations. This still doesn't... Like, if it's just a matter of blasting noise on a specific frequency... High-frequency narrow beams, okay. Starlink terminals and satellites communicate using highly focused narrow radio beams rather than broadcast signals in all directions. This makes it difficult for a local jammer on the ground to overpower the... Okay, so the signal is too powerful, and that means that if it's a matter of blasting noise on the same frequency, the amount of noise would have to be huge to lower the signal to noise ratio. I guess that's the reason. Without direct line of sight to the specific dish.
Hello, sorry to interrupt. Local
Hello,
Bulgarian IT guy here.
Cool.
Starlink works in a way where they beam the signal in a short spectrum and their satellites are not in stable orbit. They're constantly moving around. This is why they also fall down a lot. That's to be expected. So Iran has to park an unreasonable amount of satellites in stable orbit above their own heads to be able to reliably jam Starlink.
Yeah.
I'm assuming they can do it over certain areas. I don't know enough. But
mean,
to jam something like Starlink, you need to basically blanket the sky with satellites, which is not reasonable.
couldn't they just build a bunch of, like, you know, a dozen really tall towers in every big city?
They could, but then that's a fantastic target for anybody who wants to hit them.
Yeah, fair enough.
Not even for any particular goal, just to, you know, if somebody goes to war with France, they'll probably bomb the Eiffel Tower for kicks. So
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is, like, if you were in Paris, like if you were if the French government wanted to jam Starlink satellites for whatever reason, they would just place jamming devices on top of the Eiffel Tower and top of every other tall building in the city.
yes, and that should work.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't
There-
work for. Hey, I'm actually, now that I'm thinking of it, even looking at Paris, there aren't enough tall buildings for that to be really reliable. Because every time there's another building in the way, it would block the signal. So
I don't actually know, but also it matters on how much space Paris is spread rather than how many tall buildings you have.
okay, Wizzy Pew.
My lunch break is about to end,
okay.
so I'm gonna go away. But have I managed to sort of
Yeah,
answer
no,
the
that
question in your
that
opinion?
answers my question. Yeah, but yeah, chat is saying like jamming a tower is static. No, I'm not talking about jamming a tower. I'm talking about building a tower to jam a satellite thing.
Using a tower to jam a satellite is possible. It's harder than using a tower to jam a different tower,
Yeah.
but you can do it.
Yeah, no.
Like, you can do it. You can conventionally jam satellite TV.
Yeah, but I'm just reacting to a chat message, a chat comment, because they're saying using a tower, it would be like one specific frequency. But no, like the frequency is determined by the device that you're blasting noise from. Like you can broadcast noise on any frequency from the device that you're using, presumably if it's a device that has like multiple frequencies. The tower is more like the location, and it needs line of sight to the satellite dish that is receiving the SpaceX signal, so that I can mix the noise that it's broadcasting to the SpaceX signal that is being perceived by the satellite dish. And like, if it managed to blast enough noise at a high enough level at exactly the same frequency as the satellite signal, then, for example, if it managed to blast noise at exactly the same level as the Starlink satellite, you're going to have a 2-to-1 signal to noise ratio, presumably, plus the extra like background noise. But like the noise ratio, like you will still have a connection. It's just going to be a little bit spottier. So you would really need to overwhelm the Starlink signal with noise to make the signal to noise ratio low enough that the signal is basically completely lost and useless in the noise. That's the trick. The problem is that you have to be able to be perceived by every single satellite dish in the area, which means either having a satellite yourself, geostationary over the specific city that you want, and like I don't know. Like, yeah, I guess they could do this, but it would be unbelievably expensive to do, which is why they don't do it. I guess that's the simple answer, is just they could, it's just really expensive.
When the EU chief's plane was allegedly hit by GPS interference last year, over 150 news outlets reported on it. But depending on where you saw the story, your perception could be completely different. If you saw Le Monde first,
This is an ad, and we're not playing this ad until we get the ad ourselves. The sponsorship ourselves, I mean. Boom, I think it's this. There we go.
We have to set up a kind of elaborate estimation problem. But there are many unknowns.
A jammer works by broadcasting a stronger signal in the same frequency band. Kind of like yelling.
Sorry about Wizzy Pew. The Tryon left. He is on lunch break.
over someone whispering.
So if this were a jammer on the ground, you could track it down by looking at signal strength. The closer you are, the stronger the signal will get. But once you're dealing with something in space, that intuition breaks down. To work backwards from signal strength, you'd need to know how much power the satellite was transmitting.
I'm
and
back
the exact
because
shape
I'm
and direction.
still here and lunch break is another 9 minutes left. I'm going to do the fastest spaghetti eating ever in a bit. Sorry to interrupt again, Stan. Bulgaria has lifted its veto on Macedonia joining the European Union. Some of the requirements of the veto have been moved to the European Commission, but they're lighter. It's down to the Macedonian government to fully adapt. Three things which are A, kind of admit that the alphabet is Bulgarian, B, basic protections for Bulgarian minorities in Macedonia, and I do not remember C, but it was sort of reasonable.
Of its beam.
I'll leave that there because I haven't been following this piece of news specifically.
Even
It's
how
really
each
not that
receiver's
interesting.
antenna responds.
For all intents and purposes, the problem right now is that the Macedonian government is a bit weird.
Okay.
yeah.
While you, no, I need to make myself a coffee. So
Yeah, okay, I can vamp for a couple
okay,
minutes before.
vamp for a couple of minutes. Do you want me to put you on camera?
Then
or are
I
you not
vacuum some
not camera ready?
spaghetti. No. I
Okay.
do not have my good shirt on. I am sweaty as hell. I'm doing out of stuff.
Either way, I am gonna put this camera on, even though there's nothing interesting to view, and I'm gonna make myself a coffee. I'll be right back.
Chat people, do you have any other question you think might be interesting? From a person who doesn't know that much about satellites and is currently mad at the Bulgarian government. So, what you got? Wow, how's life going, I guess? Why am I Bulgarian? That is a fantastic question which to this day I cannot answer. I don't know what there is to agree on, my guy. It's what the law says. As a matter of fact, there was a very amazing moment where a bunch of Bulgarian nationalists complained that we've lifted the veto, which technically we have, but it's not over. And a bunch of Macedonian nationalists were mad that they might join the EU. It's very strange when the Bulgarian and Macedonian nationalists converge and agree on something, which is not the hating the Greeks. That's always going on in the background. So yeah, no. Good times. There are some problems with the Macedonian veto. As a general rule, Bulgaria really handled it like shit. Because gotta spit on the Macedonians, I guess. Really no good reason for the way we handled it. But at this point, it's kind of over. I don't know when, but Macedonia will join the EU within a couple of years. I know that Montenegro will be joining in 2027. So I'm guessing around the same time. The Macedonians will, and soon we shall reunite Yugoslavia in the European Union. And then we can all take over and build statues of Tito in Brussels, you know? Things like that. We had less CIA coups, more, you know, the Soviet Union straight up dunking on us for a little bit. I don't know about that one, my guy. I don't know about that one. I think if there are any Serbians in chat, they're not particularly happy about it too. But yeah. Also, to be honest, I don't know much about Iranian politics. You know, ever since the current regime came to power. I know that at different times, I know that the president's different, and that does matter, despite the fact that people pretend that it doesn't. But I don't know the details in any
What did I miss?
meaningful way. We were discussing the fact that soon Montenegro will be in the European Union, and that likely Macedonia will join around the same time. And then the Balkans conquer Europe, and we put a statue of Tito in Brussels.
And we do.
That's the plan.
We bring Yugoslavia back, apparently.
Yes, give or take.
Yeah, sounds like a very reasonable idea.
I know, right? Who could be mad at that? Anyway, I'm gonna go. You have a good stream.
Yeah, thank you.
And
See you soon.
yeah, see you around.
Can you please leave my chair alone? Clearly, she wants to stream with us. Okay. Back to, is she? No, she's still there. Okay. Back to the video. Switch to this.
Responds to signals arriving from different angles.
And at 1,200 kilometers above the Earth, very different satellite positions can produce almost identical patterns on the ground.
So instead of trying to pinpoint the transmitter directly, the researchers used a simpler filter. If a satellite caused interference at all these stations at the same time, then it had to be above the horizon for all of them at once.
Right now, there are over 15,000 active satellites in orbit, but that one constraint lets you eliminate over 98% of them. That still leaves around 200 possibilities. What's left are satellites in very high orbits, many of them in or near the geostationary belt, where they move at the same rate as the Earth rotates, so they stay fixed over one point. From about 36,000 kilometers up, a single one can see a huge portion of the Earth at once. However, if the same satellite caused multiple events on different days, then it has to satisfy that condition every single time, which narrows it down to just 14 possible suspects.
So what kind of satellites and countries were in these 14?
Well, there were several interesting candidates. One was a satellite operated by Algeria, and it even had, on public documentation, a transmitter in the same frequency band we were seeing interference on.
So they took a closer look, and on paper it fit. It was visible to all of the reference stations, and it could transmit in exactly the band they were seeing. This looked like it could be the answer. But they had a nagging doubt. At some of the most distant stations in Svalbard and western Greenland, this satellite was barely above the horizon, which meant if it was the source, the signal would have to be skimming across.
Loving the video editing 3D rendering thing, by the way. Really, really impressive stuff for a YouTube video. I mean, it's Veritasium. They have the budget for it.
Across the Earth and just barely glancing into the antenna of these receivers. Now that's not impossible. Low-angle signals can be picked up, but the more researchers looked, the less certain they became that this satellite was actually the source. So they examined data from GNSS receivers that were tracking this satellite during the interference events.
It looked just like all of the other ordinary GPS signals that were getting hammered by this interference. So the ratio of the signal power to the background noise also dropped, and dropped in the same proportion that the other DPS signals were dropping at the same time. This was not the attacker. This was just another legitimate signal in the L-band that had been interfered with.
The Algerian satellite wasn't the source, it was another victim. But what about the other 13?
I guess, yeah, and the other thing is, obviously the way you would investigate this would be, like, they're doing it in the right order, but the more important thing is, like, first they need to find the satellite, and then they can figure out what happened. But there's a weird thing of, like, this has never happened before. We don't really, like, is this a malfunction? Is this some kind of glitch that's causing this? In which case, it would have happened on another satellite at some other point. Obviously, when they look at the signal from that satellite, they're not finding anything. It's like this, there's no, if this is intentional, there's no reason for it to come from an Algerian satellite. So, yeah. Farron also has some good videos about new drugs in the EU. Maybe you can watch that later, yeah.
Any one of them could have been visible to all the stations at once.
So geometrically, they could all be the culprit. But that's where the trail started to go cold. I mean, none of them had clear public documentation showing they could transmit and jam the right frequencies. And some of them had barely any public information at all.
We couldn't narrow it down further because of all of these things we didn't know about the signals they were broadcasting, how intense they were, what their pattern was. So there we were, stuck for about 4 months.
And there was an even more fundamental problem. Everything they'd done so far relied on one idea, that all of these interference events were coming from a single satellite.
It was under a really controversial assumption. Controversial in that my student and I just couldn't come to fully embrace this assumption. If we broke our assumption, then that would relieve the focus on geostationary satellites. Then we could open up the focus on many other satellites. But now instead of 13 remaining on our list, it would expand to, maybe 100 or more satellites.
And suddenly, instead of closing in on an answer, it felt like they were back at square one. So they needed a completely different approach.
All the data.
Yeah, the assumption is, why would it be coming from only one satellite? Because that's the way that they eliminated all the satellites except 14. Of the thousands of satellites that it could be, they got it back to only 14 by saying it needs to be a satellite that was above Europe, visible to all of the receiving centers that were affected by this at all, 75 days or whatever, however many events there were. And that's how they were like eliminating all the satellites that weren't in that area of space during at least one of those events, so they can eliminate it. And if the assumption that it doesn't have to be one satellite, maybe it's multiple satellites doing the same thing, that means that you all of a sudden you're no longer at 14 satellites.
What they had was from GNSS receivers that process everything internally. They lock onto satellites, track signal strength, and then output a clean, simplified measurement, how strong that signal is compared to the background noise. And they do that just once per second. But these interference bursts only lasted 3 to 5 seconds, which means each event is captured in just a handful of samples. You can see that the signal dropped, but not precisely when it dropped, not with enough timing resolution to compare one receiver to another, to see which one was hit first, or how the interference moved across the network.
What they needed was the raw radio signal itself. So they started designing specialized receivers that could capture the data in much higher temporal resolution. The plan was to deploy them all across Europe, but building them, installing them, and waiting for new events to happen would take months, maybe years.
So in September 2025, they took their investigation public at the Institute of Navigation Conference in Baltimore, and the response was immediate. The room was packed. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What was this satellite and who was responsible?
Honestly, it was one of the most fun meetings I've been part of. It was almost like we had been brought together for a big brainstorming session to see if we could crack this problem as a community that my student and I had not been able to crack by ourselves.
The question of a mystery satellite propagated throughout the research community. The German Aerospace Center came up with an ambitious plan to take a large tracking dish, point it at candidate satellites, and try to catch the interference in real time.
But remember, we're trying to catch a needle in a haystack that only shows up over a short interval and only happens once, maybe once or twice a month.
They tracked satellite after satellite.
I love the very necessary B-roll shot.
But remember, we're trying to catch a needle in a haystack that...
Yeah, we really needed that shot to show what a needle in a haystack looked like. We do not understand the analogy otherwise.
Only shows up over a short interval and only happens once, maybe once or twice a month.
They tracked satellite after satellite, and nothing. No signal, no anomaly, no breakthrough. Yet again, the trail went cold. Weeks passed, then months, until an email arrived.
I looked at the email and then I had to reread it because it was almost like it had come right out of my dreams. You know, this can't possibly be true. He had beautiful raw data from 2 different stations.
At last, they had what they'd been missing, the raw radio signal itself. Samples of the raw voltage off the antenna capturing the actual digitized radio waves millions of times per second.
From 2 stations, one in Amsterdam in the Netherlands and one in Trondheim in northern Norway. They captured these interference events on February 11th, 2026. And now, rather than asking how strong is the signal, they could ask, when did it arrive?
With this raw data, they isolated a 2.3 second window where both stations recorded the same event. And because they were sampling at tens of megahertz, they could align the 2 datasets to pinpoint the exact moment the jamming signal arrived at both stations.
This meant they could measure the tiny difference in when the signal reached each station. Imagine the signal reaches Trondheim roughly 139 microseconds before it reaches Amsterdam. Well, that tells you that the source must be slightly closer to Trondheim than it is to Amsterdam. And that constraint gives you a shape, a curve in space of all the possible locations of the source where that exact timing difference would be observed. In 3 dimensions, that becomes a kind of warped surface, a hyperboloid. Whatever transmitted the signal had to lie somewhere on that surface. And because the raw data was so incredibly high resolution, the margin of error, the thickness of that shape, stretching tens of thousands of kilometers into space, was only about 5 meters.
And because we were so interested in avoiding errors, we just determined that we weren't not going to talk to each other for a week. We would do our separate thing for a week. And then we would come back together, compare notes, and we would hopefully have not made the same mistakes. And I presented my findings to Zach, and he presented his to me, and they were not the same.
I wonder if this has to be some AI animation. Sorry, I'm commenting on a lot of the video production rather than the content itself. But I really like this template. I would like to be able to do stuff like this, but it doesn't really fit the format that we could. But I wouldn't want to start relying too much on AI for video editing, for video production.
And I have to admit that because I'm the professor, I was pretty much insistent that my finding was correct. But then he pointed out a couple of other things, other checks that he had run. And then I realized that I had an error in my code. And once I fixed that error, I ended up getting exactly the same time difference of arrival that he did.
And now they had a way to test every possible satellite, not just the 14 from their earlier predictions. For each satellite, they took its known orbit and asked, if the signal came from here, what
Yeah, Morali. I mean, I'm not completely. I'm like 98% against using AI. I think there's like isolated cases where, in very specific situations where it is acceptable to use. Like we just used, the AI results from Google because it was faster than spending half an hour like finding the same information otherwise. But it's always like take it with a grain of salt. It's always, yeah. I would never use AI, even for like, unless it's like cartoon B-roll, where it's like very clear that it's a cartoon. This is not real footage. But I already have ethical issues using like actual B-roll just to illustrate a point, unless it's a very abstract point. But when I made the very first video on the channel about French politics and I wanted to talk about protests, I didn't have footage from the Yellow Vest protests that I wanted to talk about that I was allowed to use. So I started to look for B-roll of protests that could have looked like the Yellow Vest protests, and then I was like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. Until eventually I managed to find protests that I think was either Creative Commons or in the public domain or something. I think AI is good for like healthcare, quality check, etc. But generative AI isn't good because it might replace actual artists, writers. Yes, the argument of it replacing actual artists and writers, 100% that's true. It's not an argument that specifically applies to Barely Informed, though, or to really small YouTube channels, because if it's a question between, like, for small YouTube channels like my own, I can't afford to hire an artist. So it's either I use AI or I don't do the thing. For a while, I used a little bit of generated music. I haven't generated any new music in a long time, but I still occasionally used some of the 3 or 4 quick tracks, loop tracks that I generated 2 years ago. Nowadays, when I need a piece of music that I have a specific idea in mind for, I'll either do it myself or I'll try to collaborate with someone. But at the time where it was like, okay, this video needs to go out 3 days from now, I'm going to spend all 3 days video editing. I will not have time to spend half a day making the music myself. So this is either going to go out without music or with an AI generated track or with just a free of rights music that won't really fit what I have in mind. And that will be like a generic thing that a bunch of people are either using. So that's why I ended up using AI generated music sometimes. So if we're talking about a company or like a YouTube channel or whatever, company is like different, but a YouTube channel that wouldn't be hiring an AI and giving them a job anyway, I do think that there's a case to be made for them kind of having some, excuse to use AI, but again, very sparingly and try to do it responsibly is the thing, which is not always possible, which is why it's always better if you can avoid it to just avoid it entirely. But if someone can do these things, especially big companies, they should. Yeah, exactly. If you can afford to hire a real person, you should never be using AI for the same thing. Yeah, I was gonna try to think of time crunch or other excuses, but still just hire more people, get more time for the deadline, whatever. It is that simple. If you have the budget for humans, you literally it is super shitty to use a tool that was built to cut humans out of the loop, essentially.
timing difference would we expect between Amsterdam and Trondheim? Then they compared that prediction to the real data. If it didn't match, the satellite was ruled out.
And since they had a continuous 2.5-second recording, they could take this a step further. As the satellite moved, that hyperboloid would shift slightly through space. So the real source had to stay aligned with it the entire time, which made this test incredibly strict.
And only one satellite was anywhere near this time difference of arrival measurement. And in fact, it wasn't just near, it was dead on.
The only possible culprit was a Russian satellite, Cosmos 2546.
I love this because he spent 25 minutes of this video kind of, oh, there's this thing that's jamming satellite GPS data or GPS signal in the EU, and that's really mysterious and like possibly nefarious. Who could it possibly be? Well, it turns out it's Russia. This is the equivalent of if you're playing a game of Clue and your different characters are like normal people, like, oh, it's like I don't know what the name of the Clue characters are, and their little like innocent faces. Oh, it's the librarian and whatever. And like one of the characters is like this guy, and then it turns out the killer was him all along. It's like, okay, this is the least surprising twist ever in a murder mystery, but why not? I guess.
It remained perfectly on the hyperboloid, aligning with their data to within 200 meters, which is well within the uncertainty of the satellite's publicly available orbital data.
Now, it's worth saying here, this work is still new and it hasn't undergone peer review, but independent teams in Europe have verified aspects of these findings. There was only one slight issue. Cosmos 2546 was launched on the 22nd of May, 2020, so it couldn't explain events going back to 2019.
But then they discovered that Cosmos 2546 is part of a constellation of 6 satellites. This constellation is part of Russia's early missile warning system.
It's basically part of their Golden Dome. If you've heard of the US Golden Dome, this is part of the sensory apparatus for the Russian missile detection system.
They sit in what's called a Molniya orbit, a highly elliptical path that carries them high over the northern hemisphere where they can slow down and linger. It's the way that high-latitude countries like Russia can get the benefits of something like geostationary orbit across multiple satellites. But this also means this constellation covers large parts of the globe, so they have the capability to jam GNSS across a far wider region than we've seen, including over the United States.
The pattern already told us this wasn't random. The frequency told us it wasn't natural. And now we know it's coming from a military system in orbit. But intention? Well, that's harder to prove.
What is already being broadcast is enormously powerful.
Again, Jason Voorhees, intention? I'm not sure. We cannot prove the intention of this guy. That's true. That's really hard to prove.
It's like hundreds of times more powerful than the GPS signals themselves.
But it's slightly offset from the GPS frequency, which seems odd. Because surely, if you want to jam GPS properly, you would put your jamming signal directly on top of it. Well, Todd actually has a theory about this.
If you're going to test this capability, then you test it in the neighborhood of the signal you intend to jam, but not right on that signal. And you test it only briefly, just to make sure everything's still working. And then in the eventual future...
Yeah, good point. Try and have we asked him? That's a good question.
Where there is a hot conflict, they go ahead and tune their transmitter down to the DPS band, but it's much more damaging now that it lies right on that band.
So one possibility is this. What we've been seeing are tests, a system being exercised without fully revealing what it can do. And while just a theory at this point, there is another hint this might be the case. The raw data also revealed a second interference burst, aimed at a lower frequency, 1558.5 megahertz, which overlaps with signals from the Chinese Beidou navigation system.
So, yes, and like the fact that they're also doing other tests on the Chinese GPS equivalent is definitely weird, is definitely interesting. The problem that I have with this is if you're doing tests, like we know that Europe would be one of their main targets if they were to use this system. And it sounds really weird that they would be doing like 75, I don't know how many, like I think it was 75 days where this happened, that they said at the beginning of the video. The idea that they would be doing 75 tests on their actual target and leaving themselves like wide open for detection. I guess they were thinking that the signal is going to be so short that it's not going to be detected and they can do it 75 times and it's fine. But it seems a little bit weird that they wouldn't just do that on, like use similar satellites to test it on an area of Siberia where no one gives a shit and no one's going to be paying attention. The fact that they're going to be doing this over Europe for the tests is a little bit weird to me.
I'll say it in the most conservative way possible. I can no longer say this is accidental with confidence. I'm leaning toward this being a periodic test of a capability that would be very damaging if it was deployed in anger.
But when we spoke to a team that had independently traced the signals back to satellites in Russia's missile warning system, they had another idea.
So there'll be very odd behavior to be continually testing something.
So our alternative theory is that those might actually be very short, very brief, very specific comms messages coming from those satellites.
And if that were true, transmitting messages on these frequencies would provide a layer of protection, because the enemy wouldn't want to jam them and risk disrupting their own navigation systems.
I'm not saying it's not the jamming. That's still a very strong possibility. I think the point is there are some odd things about that, and there is clearly here an alternative explanation.
But whether these signals were covert messages or tests of a space-based jamming system, the events themselves were incredibly brief.
And that might explain something else, why this went unnoticed for years. But if the system...
WizzyPew. Can you just tell me in chat, WizzyPew, if that's how I should be pronouncing it? Or, like, do you have a preferred pronunciation of that? Because I'm not going to say W1ZZ1. Should I just be going with WizzyPew? Anyway, the thing to understand, and I'm working on a project related to this, but the question isn't whether Russia is going to start new wars with Europe. Really, the reality is Russia already considers itself to be at war with the EU. It's just at a very simmering low-level war right now, but the number of things that they're doing to fuck with the EU is kind of extremely concerning, and it's starting to slowly appear in the news. Like you're seeing a few articles here and there that are starting to connect the dots. But in terms of like the occasional rhetoric that is coming from the Kremlin, where they're like doing their thing, where they're like it's kind of like what they were doing during the annexation of Crimea, where it was like, yo, we have nothing to do with this. Oh, these military men that are showing up there, we have never heard of them before. No connection to us. And then, at the same time, they were kind of joking about the fact that their denials were completely non-credible. It's the same thing that they do. Like, this is the kind of the Russian method with almost everything, is to be doing these denials in ways that are absolutely ridiculous and kind of laughing about it at the same time. Like later on, they would joke about their little green men. Once it just came out, like once the annexation happened, they were like, oh, the Russian little green men and everything. But it's the same with Novichok, the thing that they used to poison a couple of people in the UK, to poison Alexei Navalny. They used a nerve agent that is only made by the Russian military. Like, only the Russian military makes this one specific poison. And that's the poison that they're using for their, like, covert assassinations, which a lot of people take to mean it can't be them. Like, it has to be someone doing a false flag, because why the hell would Russia do their covert assassinations with something that could so easily be traced back to Russia? But the other thing is Russia is kind of trolling with this, where they're doing the denials, saying you can't definitively prove that it's us. But at the same time, they're sending the signal to the people who, might be next on the list that, hey, we're coming for you, basically. Like, we killed this like former Russian spy who became, who defected to the West. We killed this Russian dissident. And if you feel like, if you want to fuck with Russia, Novichok is coming for you too. That's essentially what they're saying when they're doing this thing, while also kind of relying on the kind of overwhelming and unjustified level of good faith that other countries are giving them, just because they don't want to escalate. So they're like, well, we can't prove that it's Novichok, so we're just not going to act on it. But it's that level of always trolling in that way. Which is very typical of what Russia has been doing since USSR days, where it was always like, oh, this guy killed himself by stabbing himself 5 times in the back. Of course, that's how you kill yourself. That's, official report, official autopsy, cause of, like, method of suicide, stabbed himself 5 times in the back is the kind of stuff that you would get in USSR days. So yeah. There's so many things that Russia is doing with the EU in terms of like sabotaging critical infrastructure, in terms of assassinations that are happening here and there, assassination attempts, even like psychological manipulation things. I'm working on a multi-part video on this, so I don't want to spoil too much of it. But yeah, it's like, for anyone who's like, oh, Russia is too demonized, stop talking about this. The argument you can make for the demonization thing is a certain level of, we are basically at a, probably more than what I would call a Cold War. And so they are acting in a state of war. And there is some level of like, we're doing this to them too. I don't know how much sabotage by Western operatives are happening in Russia, but like, we are funding the drones that Ukraine is using to bomb their facilities. We're funding Ukraine's war machine, which it also results in like, car bombs and things like that are going off in Russia and killing important people. It is a war, but from our side, politically in Western countries and European countries, we think it's a war between Ukraine and Russia. And like the EU, the US kind of not so much, but in theory, the US are helping Ukraine defend themselves against Russia. But from the Russian side, they are fighting the entire Western hemisphere. Ukraine is just like the main theater of war, but they are very much prepared for that theater of war to extend to the entire European Union, like to the entire European continent, if not the entire world. And the question is, can they afford that? And also, can we afford that to some extent? But yeah, this is way more serious than just, are they maybe going to start other wars with other people? Because again, like from their perspective, they are at war with us. I heard an analyst present it as, we're not at war with Russia, but we're not at war with Russia in so many words. It's like kind of a gray area where Russia maintains a level of deniability and a level of keeping it at a low enough level that it's not too, that it doesn't force Western countries' hand in responding, militarily. And because the West and especially the EU don't want to escalate it to a full all-out war, they're kind of taking that. They're seeing what Russia is doing, and they're kind of going along with the fact that it's at a very low level, so they can kind of continue to go, we don't know, and we're going to pretend not to see it, and we're just going to, respond diplomatically. Maybe we're going to, like, tweak some of the sanctions or respond in very limited ways, but they're also purposefully seeing all of this happening, recognizing what is happening, and going, what justification can we use not to escalate, basically. It's this really weird not cat and mouse game, but it's really weird kind of bluff poker game that's happening. That's really interesting, but also really scary. Yes, but a new front, I mean, it looks like they're hammered, though. Yeah, I mean, they are, but they're also getting a lot of new money from the war in Iran, from the blockade of Hormuz. The U.S. had to lift sanctions on Russia, on Russian oil specifically, because of the Hormuz Strait being closed. So they're actually selling a lot more oil now than they were a few months ago. Remind me to ask something about Eastern Europe in EU and Poland after this video is done. From Russia's side, it's like the type with the mustache. I don't know what that means. I think the way Russia thinks about Ukraine is how Iran saw the Iran-Iraq war, as the world against Iran also took POWs from most of the countries. Yeah, basically, yeah, that's essentially how they're seeing it. I don't think Russia has capacity for new fronts, to be honest, except if China does not decide to help. Yes, but you know, there's also a question of there's a very real question of where the U.S. would stand in World War III. Not necessarily with or like on the side of Russia, but probably not on the side of NATO, which is kind of a scary thing to imagine. Because the rest of NATO, mostly being European Union countries, apart from a couple of exceptions, have very, very weak militaries. We've basically haven't been investing in our militaries for a really long time. So France has a pretty good military. Apart from France, it's mostly like the thing is, especially after, what is it now, 3-4 years of war in Ukraine, Russia has dialed in, I don't know if dialed in is the right term, but Russia has built or already had, but improved its capacity for manufacturing weapons, for manufacturing ammunition that it can continuously replenish. There is no manufacturing capacity on the EU side. So that's why the military aid from the EU that is going to Ukraine is going through manufacturing happening in the US, where right now the US is not spending any new money on aid to Ukraine. Did someone join?
Yes, my good Sayum, I'm not gonna do any work today because of you.
Okay.
I want you to cite your sources on stream. I now want you to cite some sources because only two countries in the European have strong armies. France doesn't even have the strongest army in the European Union.
Who has the strong? Poland.
Poland.
Yeah, Poland,
it is Poland. And
but again, if you're talking
Russia
about
didn't have nuclear weapons, the Polish army would give them the spanking of a lifetime. I was gonna say in a week, but there is a guy who thought he'll take Russia in a week before me, and that didn't go well. So I will refrain from giving time frames. Also,
the other thing
Russia
is
has, yeah, go ahead.
There's many. So Poland, because it's near the almost at the border with Russia. I mean, it has the border with Belarus, which is basically Russia. Let's be honest. There is, and it does have a border with Russia and Kaliningrad, I think. If my mental map is correct,
Your mental map is correct, but no fighting would happen in Kaliningrad if
it wouldn't.
Russia's already withdrawn everything that resembles an important asset out of Kaliningrad.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's why Poland has a really strong military, which justifiably so. France has always kind of had an uncertain relationship with NATO. Like there is a long time where France didn't want to be in NATO, or joined but wasn't sure, or left NATO for a while and then rejoined. So France always insisted on investing pretty significantly in its own military. But the other European countries, like Germany, is reinvesting in its military for the first time since World War II, which has its own kind of weird connotations. Nordic countries don't really have I think Finland mostly relies on how fucking cold it is in Finland for its own self-defense.
And Sweden have formidable armies for considering what size they are.
Yeah, considering what size they are, but they're tiny.
Population rather than anything else. They have pretty modernized armies. They can do pretty good fighting, but you're talking of countries who can field maybe 500,000 on a good day. Another thing about the Nordic countries is culture and in the approach to military. One of the infamous Bulgarian jokes is that we're the Prussia of the Balkans, because even in modern day, Bulgaria can modernize up to 1 million people in dire straits. For a country of 6 million, where about a third of our population is over the age of 50, that is not normal. But
but for example,
these things do come into play.
The other challenge is, and I was going to say the other challenge is just the will to fight. I guess the fact that EU countries are democracies would make it harder.
The problem is that it's really hard to sell in Europe a war with Russia to certain countries.
Yeah.
When a
so-
country joins NATO, that country fulfills a certain purpose. For example, the majority of Bulgarian contribution to NATO is logistics. That's simply based on where we are on the map. So a lot of logistics and communication systems are based around Bulgaria and stuff like that, and our army concentrates on that. But it would be hard to sell to the Bulgarian army, shall we lads go to Kiev? And that is a problem with Spain, with Italy, and that can become a problem if there is a full-blown war. The only way the European Union goes to a full-blown war with Russia is that Russia straight up invades, a full guns blazing atrocity to follow in a very brutal way, because that can spark the needed convincing.
I mean,
But
it's
this is
either
why Russia is
that-
keeping the war at this like lukewarm, we sort of maybe slow boiling the egg level.
Yeah, 100%.
Because
But
if they
like,
fully
it's
commit,
either
there
that
will be
or
a
it's like
response.
it can be that, or it can be just like that would be the what would trigger a war between the EU and Russia. But if there's a world war that starts, then kind of all bets are off, because at that point it's like, well, we might need to do there wouldn't necessarily need to be a full-on Russian invasion for European countries to go to war with Russia. It's, for example, Russia is attacking European supply lines or stuff like that. So there could be other things happening depending on how the world develops.
That is way above my level of understanding.
I'm completely speculating on that. But the point that I was making is just the main point that I was making is that Russia already considers itself at war with the entire EU
It does.
and not just at war with Ukraine only.
As somebody who spends a bit of time every week reading a bit of Russian news, they do. And in many ways, they portray it as this great struggle against Western decadence or whatever.
Yeah.
The thing I wanted to dispel is that the idea that Europe cannot defend itself. Actually, at the moment, the biggest problem Europe has, it can't project power. This is why both France, the UK, and Germany are trying to build new jets, new aircraft carriers. That's going in very typical European fashion, not as fast and as well as it should, but it's something. And
Typical
one of the
European
biggest
fashion.
problems with going to war with Russia is that, well, even if we win, we have to occupy Russia, which is not within current capabilities of the European Union.
That's
Maybe
also-
we get to the Euros and then we are holding our dicks because do you want to go to Siberia, my good sir?
That's also the thing that I wanted to bring up from a point that you made earlier. It's like, it's also very much a question of where the war is happening. If it's a matter of Russia invades the EU, then like obviously Russia's not even going to try to do that because it knows that it can't. If the US is not involved, and if US weapons manufacturing and ammunition manufacturing are not involved, that's a bigger problem. But it's still outside of like the fact that Russia is struggling so much against Ukraine. Imagine if the front line was like so much bigger and they had to try to occupy so much more territory in the EU. That would not go in their direction. But even if the EU had like a much stronger army and it had to invade Russia, just look at what happened in Iran recently. It's way easier. It's unbelievably easier to overwhelm an enemy on your own territory, especially for longer periods of time. If you manage to drag the fight along for just a few weeks against an enemy that has like expensive modern equipment that takes like, you know, that is expensive to operate, and that doesn't have the manufacturing capacity to constantly replenish its ammunition fast enough to resupply the stuff that it's using, then look at like currently U.S. missile supplies are like they've used. I think it was a third of what they use. I don't remember what the numbers are, but the current stockpiles of missiles by the U.S. are surprisingly low considering it was a relatively short engagement they had with Iran so far.
Okay.
And
Let me address something about the Iran war. It is a war. Let's call it a war. What it is.
Yeah, of course.
There is 4 factors I think that are playing a major role here. First of all, you are right. Essentially, this is a war at Iran's doorstep. And it's not, well, it is just on Iranian territory. I don't know how maritime territory in the Hormuz Strait works, but some of it has to be by default Iranian. So it's in their backyard. It's on their home soil. The second thing you need to address is how far away the US is. While an aircraft carrier is essentially moving the air force of a small country in your backyard, it still requires supplies and stuff that the US does not reliably move to said aircraft carriers. The United States does rely a lot on other countries to do its lifting, not in the direct fighting way, but in many other ways. The third problem they have, and which is the reason I think that they haven't landed troops on Iranian soil, is, can anyone tell me what the US ground doctrine is? Because best I've checked, the US ground doctrine for war is, together with our coalition of allies, we are doing a thing. During Desert Storm, the front assault was done by the French Foreign Legion. During the invasion of Afghanistan, there was a lot of non-US troops in those coalitions. The United States is great at big scary weapon that sits very far away from you and is your problem before you've seen it, heard it, or know it's coming. That doesn't really work when you park an aircraft carrier and go, my strait now. That's not gonna fly. So, sort of as a consequence of that, Europe has way too much ground doctrine. It's pretty much what we do, which is why currently Europe has the problem where we have to get aircraft carriers and jets. We have enough cannons, enough infantry, enough mechanized infantry, enough tanks, and probably very soon enough drones. But these are good things if you're fighting on home soil, not advancing or attacking, unless it's World War II, and it isn't. So it's a very strange situation. The problem we are all facing is that in practice, the United States has lost its mind because there is an orange tumor in charge and it's asleep. So I can't tell you where that would go. But the one thing I'm certain of is that if Russia decides to drop a line of cocaine or Novichok and try to invade Europe, it's not gonna go well. The problem we are facing is the cost that would incur. Because a lot of people are thinking, oh, Russia wouldn't fully go to war with Europe because it's stupid. Lads, I don't want to bother you, but the Nazis invading Poland was stupid. By all means, they should have had their ass kicked immediately. But they didn't. And it went into a world war. And it was a long and prolonged problem. Also, I never know if the Donald's gonna hit his head into something tomorrow and start some bullshit over Taiwan. In the end, the player that decides if this is a world war and how it's gonna go is China. Because they don't have as many of the problems we have. Now, internally, China doesn't look as stable as it pretends to be. But also, any one of you here got any idea what's going on in China? Because I don't. And frankly, no one really does. That's kind of the Chinese way. So yeah, I'm gonna go do my job now. This is fun. And sorry for like popping up here and there, unplanned and unscheduled. But, you know, my code isn't gonna write itself. As much as people have been telling me to use AI for my code, hey, I'm not doing it.
I was gonna say, like, Claude maybe
because it's not worth... No, man. Like... We can talk about it a different day. And at some point in the future, Claude are in the correct direction where they're making highly specified custom use AI that can do a lot of stuff. But the way AIs work right now, a moderately good expert in the field is just better than an AI.
Yeah.
So unless you're replacing an entry-level person who's supposed to be working, you're not achieving anything with this. And also, you're not training a new person. But we'll talk about this a different day. I write 90% of my code myself. I only use a thing in case I need to check stuff.
Claude would be useful for people who don't know how to write code at all, or for people who write so much code that they can't afford to do it all themselves anymore, because that's kind of the way that the code monkey industry is going.
Yes. The thing code will be most useful is if you want to make scripts for like simple tasks on your computer. Maybe one day we can have a stream where I demonstrate some good uses, but not today.
Yeah.
All right, see ya.
There's another thing that I wanted to mention when it comes to the possibility of Russia, like Russia going to war with the EU, as things currently stand with the current kind of state of things right now is one thing. Russia going to war with the EU, if they have developed a GPS jamming technology that they've also developed the countermeasures so that they can, continue to have their own systems, but all of our systems are down, and possibly they've also developed technologies for like cyber warfare or other kind of jamming signals that we don't even know about. That's a different situation all of a sudden. All of a sudden, it would be maybe less stupid. But I think if they had, either they're not using that in Ukraine because they're hiding it, or more probably they don't really have it operational to the point where it would be that useful to deploy, or they're like keeping it for an extreme situation. But the thing with like Russia's advanced technology is like one of their more advanced weapons is the Su-57. What is it? 5th generation fighter jet, which is a very, very cool looking fighter jet. It's the one in Top Gun Maverick. They don't name it, but it's the same design. Su-57. Let me have it on screen. Can I find a cool photo of it? I guess we're gonna use this photo. It's a horrible, disgusting render of it. Okay. Can I find a real... Okay, I guess I'm gonna take this one. Boom. Open. Yeah, very cool looking plane. Not the best photo, but anyway. They have, I think, including prototypes of this that they just kept because they couldn't afford to buy enough to produce enough of the final version. They have, I think, at most a dozen of these. We don't even know how many of those are actually able to fly. So, and these are so expensive that they don't even fly them anywhere near the any theater of war. They fly them like over the horizon, way into Russian territory, firing missiles long distance so that they don't risk losing a single one of these as possible. So that's kind of the problem with a lot of these like super expensive technologies, is that you made a thing and now you can't really afford to use it, or you can only use it in a way that is like very, very limited, because you really don't want to, really don't want to have to build a new one or to fix the one that you made because it's so expensive to fix. Remember the rules with Russian military, anything, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. I did not know that rule, but yeah, anyway. Let's go back to the video. Wait, is there a... I'm sorry for my bad English. I decided to learn German. Now I don't even speak my mother language properly. My German is non-existent despite the fact that I've been living in Germany for 8 years at this point, so I cannot blame you at all.
Were ever fully switched on, the impact could be enormous.
When we see maps of massive GPS interference today, you are almost entirely looking at reports from commercial aircraft affected by ground-based jammers. Typical airliners cruise at altitudes between 30,000 and 42,000 feet, which is high enough to remain in direct line of sight of jamming signals across vast distances. But at ground level, buildings and terrain shield much of our infrastructure from that interference.
But everything's lined.
Yeah, I guess that's what we were saying earlier about building a tower. It would have to be a very, very, very tall tower for it to be able to jam ground level or like, house level satellite dishes, even if there's like a building in between.
A sight from space, yeah. It's a invisible utility that supports virtually every technology, and it's essential to the way we live every day. The United States made GPS its gift to the world, and clever engineers took this free thing that works really well, and very precise, and incorporated it into all kinds of systems. It's one of those wicked problems. You really don't know what all the dependencies are and where all the interconnections are, because it's just proliferated throughout the world.
Global satellite navigation systems underpin aviation and global shipping. It synchronizes financial systems, keeps cell towers on time. It is crucial for logistics networks, ride-hailing apps, delivery systems, even dating apps. A disruption of these systems across an area as large as what these satellites are capable of could affect hundreds of millions of people.
It would send shockwaves of fear through the world, not just through Europe, because an entirely new weapon from space would have been revealed. And people would know that at any time of their choosing, Russia could deploy this over their country or over their continent. I do think that this is a massive escalation in the electronic warfare background conflict that's going on right now.
Now, this sounds scary, but the truth is we should have been worried about this fragile system already.
The threat has always been there. Severe solar events could ionize the atmosphere and keep all kinds of signals from space from coming in, or it could destroy satellites. We could have a version of the Kessler effect in medium Earth orbit, and satellites be destroyed by debris. So everybody should be...
Kessler effect. We talked about this a couple of streams ago, and I couldn't remember the name. That's when we saw visualizations earlier of how many satellites are in space. It was somewhere around... Was it this? I don't think it was this. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to find it. There's so many satellites, actual functioning satellites in space already. Where do I live in Germany? In Berlin. There's so many functioning satellites in space, and in addition to the functioning satellites, there's so much debris that is floating in orbit around the Earth. There's a website where we can actually track all space objects in orbit. Is it this? Downloading assets. Yeah, it's going to be this. Boom. Okay. This is a very scary looking visualization. I don't even know. So if we add, let's remove let's remove beams. Hey, can I just... Are instruments the actual objects? Debris. Yeah, there you go. Purple is debris. There's so much shit in orbit around Earth. And this is only low Earth orbit. There comes a time where if one of these things breaks, like all of these things are traveling around Earth at the speed of a bullet. And if one of these things breaks apart and the debris starts to spread, it's what happens in the film Gravity. It hits another satellite, that satellite blows up, sends a bunch of debris, still in the same orbits. More satellites, more satellites, more satellites. It's a chain reaction that very quickly turns all of this into just it wouldn't even be a meteor shower, because it would, all of these things are they're constantly falling behind the horizon. And if they break into smaller pieces, they're still going to be falling behind the horizon. There's constantly an orbit around Earth. So they would stay in orbit around Earth, and because there's no atmosphere, there's nothing that's slowing them down. There's no propulsion that's keeping them at that speed, but also there's no drag that's slowing them down, so they can stay there basically forever. And this looks a lot worse than it is. I mean, it's bad. It's just like, we don't know how much debris there would have to be, or how many objects there would have to be in orbit around Earth before it would actually become unsustainable. But it is pretty scary. The fact is, if it was super, super dangerous to be in orbit right now, if it was dangerous to the point where, this does look very, very scary. But if it was as scary as this looks, we wouldn't have anyone on the ISS. We just don't know. Statistically, I guess we probably have some estimates, but it's hard to tell how much more we can put into space before we trigger an incident that would actually make this look as bad as it, like, that would make this as bad as it looks, basically. That would trigger like a gravity situation. But there is a possibility. My computer was struggling to keep, like, to run that page. There's a possibility that relatively soon. Why can't you donate though? This is not the monetized channel, so you can't donate through YouTube, but there should be a link to donate to the stream in the description if that's working. Let me double check. It should be. There's a possibility that if enough stuff breaks in space, if that chain reaction happens, we could basically be locked on Earth. We would be unable to send rockets into space. We'd be able to send any new satellites because they would get destroyed as soon as they reach space. We would be unable to send new people to the moon or to Mars or anything like that. And yeah, we'd be stuck here. And we'd be stuck here without GPS and without a bunch of the very important space technology that kind of empowers a lot of the very real, tangible tools that we have on Earth. The internet is, reliant on satellites and GPS and all of that. So it would be bad. It would be really, really bad. And where it doesn't sound like companies like SpaceX or even governments are taking that risk that seriously. Apart from right now, in theory, it's illegal to send any weapons to space. It's unclear how that's enforced or like how seriously that's taken by governments at the moment. I mean, they haven't, as far as we know, but like it seems like there's starting to be electronic warfare in space, so that's a problem. Let me check on the donations thing if it's still working. Hey, thank you, Izzy. Did you ever reply to the thing that I asked about the pronunciation, by the way? For Coffee in Berlin. Thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't have time to finish reading that, but I'm going to open this page so I can look at that. Where was it? Was it this? Yes, there we go. Your YouTube connection has expired. Okay. Do I need to do like a 2FA or something? Yep. Well, thank you so much. Okay, it's working. It's working again. By the way, yeah, if I know that there aren't that many people on stream right now. But if we manage to get this channel monetized, which would need I think we'd basically need to triple the current subscribers. That would be really cool because it would also help make so we would need a bunch of views and 1,000 subscribers basically. But that would help fund the main channel videos just from like if streams, like if we're starting to do like more streams and putting out stuff on a weekly basis instead of a 3-monthly basis, that would help fund, like, because streams are going to be less resource intense than, a half-hour in-depth video that involves traveling and filming on the ground and stuff like that. So basically everything that we would make streaming would would be used for long form stuff. I think we're basically done with this video.
We could have a version of the Kessler effect in medium Earth orbit, and satellites be destroyed by debris. So everybody should have already been concerned. They should continue to be concerned, and this is just another example of why.
But the good news is we already know exactly how to fix the problem. It involves building a future system that doesn't rely entirely on weak satellite signals.
We suggest that a resilient national PNT architecture would be signals from space, terrestrial broadcast, and fiber, because those are three completely different phenomenologies, and a vector that would impact one would not impact the other two.
Some countries are already doing this. Places like South Korea, China, and the UK are building out backup networks that don't rely on signals from space. They're using fiber optic cables to securely share time from atomic clocks here
Yeah, no wonder South Korea is doing that.
on Earth. And for navigation, they're turning to systems like ELORAN, huge, high-powered radio towers that are much harder to overwhelm. Other solutions are even being developed using magnetic and quantum systems that use subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field to work out position, so you don't need any external signals. But despite all of this, most countries, including the United States, still remain highly dependent on GPS and other satellite navigation systems.
In this video, we've been talking about jamming.
I mean, it's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning of stream about the number of like the insane math that is involved in a bunch of the stuff that we do use on a daily basis, like GPS, for example. It's kind of crazy. I was gonna say that we're not building any new things like that, but on the other hand, like we released ChatGPT, that is, for all of its many problems involved with AI, as we've talked about in the last couple of streams, is an insane technology. Like, it is absolutely crazy what we're currently able to do with the current level of AI. So I'm not going to say that we're not developing any of these things, but it seems like a lot of this really old technology like GPS could really use an update, especially because a lot of these technologies were kind of built in an era where we thought, oh, the world is way more stable right now, and we don't need to worry about World War III. That's not going to happen. When was GPS launched? When did GPS start? I guess Cold War, so they were worried about it to some extent, but they didn't have 78. But they didn't have an alternative at the time, and I think it would be time to start to worry about making more resilient systems. Anyway, I almost kind of want to pace myself, since I want to be streaming often. I need to keep my energy levels. Like, if I exhaust myself streaming until midnight today, I'm really gonna not want to stream next stream. So yeah, I might try to do 2 hours of stream. Seems like a good start. And as I build up my capacity to be putting on a stream, I will probably make them longer and longer. But I'm gonna leave it there for now. If you know people who follow the channel, the main channel, but don't follow the live stream channel, help me try to get it to the point where it's monetized, shared around. And we're gonna be trying to release more segments, like more cut videos from these live streams, so that it gets more views that way too. Because the goal would be, if we can really have big investigative reporting projects going up on the main channel and just more chill live stream stuff, commenting on news as it's happening, more immediate stuff on this channel. That's kind of the goal. But it would be really cool if we can get this channel to the point where it's also kind of monetized on its own, so that that revenue stream can help fund the main channel stuff. So I'll leave it at that. And next video will either have an interview or maybe react to the Fern video about European new drugs in the EU or something like that. There's a couple of other videos that I wanted to react to. So yeah, we'll probably see what we can do with that next time. Cool. Have a good evening, everyone. And I will see you on Friday, 7 p.m. CET. Bye.